but I want to fill in the contours of sort of how we should process the question anyway, even though I've given you what I think to be the answer, right, and what I'm convinced is the answer. When you have a question like that in front of you, this sort of open-ended thing, does race still matter? You have to ask yourself, how do you find the answer to that question? How do we know the answer to that question? Now, on the one hand, it's obvious, right? You look at the objective evidence of whether or not race still matters in our country. And I will talk a little bit about that evidence in a second, which I think objectively suggests that the answer is yes. But you see, sometimes simple objectivity isn't enough, because if it were, this would never have been a controversial topic in our country. The objective evidence that race matters and that racism is a real social phenomena has always been with us, and yet even when it has been at its most obvious, there have been millions of people, especially those of us in the dominant racial group in this society, those of us in this country and this culture called white, who have not seen it. Even when it was blatant, even when in retrospect everyone would say it was there, back in the day they still didn't see it. So historically, objective fact has never been enough to convince people whose racial identity put them at the top of the ladder that the problem was real. How can I say that? It's simple. All I have to do is look at the polling data of white Americans in those days. You see, it's one thing to stand before you, or to do as I will this evening in front of the students and whoever comes, and tell them that racism is still a problem in 2010. It's one thing to say that. I can understand, not agree with, but I can understand someone who disagrees with that position. I can understand it. I can get my head around it, because we can say that there's been just enough objective progress over a 50-year period, let's say, that it would make sense maybe for a young person in particular, a student just out of high school or undergraduate in college, to look and say, well, my goodness, comparatively, obviously we've made so much progress, it really isn't a problem. I would disagree with that conclusion, but I can at least rationalize it. But see, it's a very different thing to say that about the early 1960s. In fact, no one would say it. I think we all know that if I were to ask any white person in America, pretty much, who had even an ounce of rationality, which is the case for most of us, white, black, or otherwise, whether or not the society was equal in the early 1960s, let's say 1963 or 1962, that now in 2010, every white person would say, well, of course not. Of course not. Even those who object mightily to my presence here on the campus, or say they don't, but they aren't real happy that I'm here, would agree that in the early 1960s, this was a profoundly unequal place. There is no really alternative argument to that. There is no other side to that. That was before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, before the Fair Housing Act. We were still an apartheid state in the early 1960s. We may not use that language, but that's honest. That's truth. We were a formal system of white supremacy at that time. We don't use that language, but that's truth. And it's pretty hard to deny if we want to maintain any sort of historical or intellectual honesty. And yet what's interesting is not to ask someone in 2010 about those days, because that's easy. If I ask you in 2010 whether things were equal in 62, you say no. It's easy. It's no sweat off your back. It doesn't take any courage to acknowledge that. What's interesting is to look at what otherwise rational white people said in 1962. Or in 1963, when the past wasn't the past, when the past was the present, right? Because if even rational people, which I think most folks are, regardless of their race, I think most people are rational, I think most people are decent, I think most people are compassionate and kind and capable of discerning truth from fiction. I could be wrong in this, but I have 2 small children, so I have a vested interest in believing that that is true. And if you have evidence that I'm wrong, please keep it to yourself. I would rather not know that my view of human nature is inaccurate. So I am starting with the assumption most white folks, whether in 2010 or in 1962, are capable of knowing truth, and yet, when you look at the Gallup polls taken in those years, not now asking about those years, but in those years themselves, what do you find? You find that in 1963, when white folks were asked by the Gallup organization, do you believe that blacks have equal opportunity in your community in regard to jobs, in regard to schooling, in regard to housing? 2 out of 3 white folks even then, a little more than that, about 68%, so almost 7 out of 10 said yes. 7 out of 10 white folks in 63 said yes, they have fully equal opportunity with white people in our communities. This is delusional. And yet that is where the vast majority of white Americans, even in 63, let's remember what 1963 was when it comes to race in this country. It's the year Medgar Evers is shot to death in his driveway. It's the year that George Wallace stands in the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama and announces segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. It's the year that Bull Connor turns dogs and hoses on black protesters and their white allies in the streets of Birmingham. It is the year of the March on Washington. So what's interesting, right, at the height of the civil rights struggle, in an intense era of racial terror against people of color in this country, almost 7 out of 10 white folks basically didn't see that there was a problem. So when the March on Washington happens, August 28, 1963, Dr. King gives the I Have a Dream speech. Walter Cronkite comes on the news that night, shows a clip of the I Have a Dream speech, maybe the first time people have seen it because it's a news event. It's not a retrospective that we drag out every January. Right? It's daily news, and here's the clip, and here's Dr. King. I have a dream, and 7 out of 10 white folks, by our own admission, are looking at the screen going, I don't get it. I don't understand what the problem is. Why are all these black people so angry? Why are they marching? Dream? What dream? Why are you dreaming? Isn't everything okay? Honey, everything's okay, right? I mean, these people have lost their mind. Right? That's in effect what 7 out of 10 white folks were processing. That's where 7 out of 10 white folks were, even though they were mostly decent people, not bigots, even though they were mostly rational people. These are people who remembered to pay their monthly light bill, remembered to get the kids off to school, change the cat pan, walk the dog, wash their hands after going to the restroom, all that good stuff. These are rational human beings, but they could not discern what millions of their fellow countrymen and women could see right in front of them, and which in retrospect all of us can see. A year before, 1962, Gallup asked white folks, do you think black children have equal educational opportunity in your community? And 87% of whites said sure. Almost 9 out of 10 in 1962, y'all. This is really fascinating to me, because I wonder how otherwise decent and rational human beings, which I believe almost all of those in that survey to be, could look at the same set of social facts, the same social reality, and see something that is not only so different from what people of color saw, but so utterly wrong in every possible way. You see, it isn't even arguable that that was wrong, and yet that's what the vast majority, overwhelming majority of white America believed to be true. So objective fact isn't enough, you see, because the dominant group, for reasons that we need to think about, has never been able to see the truth. Or maybe they're able to, but have chosen not to. It's not just in the 60s.